I have to apologize that I've not worked for 2 years, and so I was always bad at putting a PPT or a slide presentation together. I preferred working on the ground. So this is a very simple slides kind of show that you're going to see that accompanies the talk. Can we put the first slide? Yeah, so in keeping with the location where I'm giving the talk and having been associated with KCC before, expanding east and by northeast, conservation strategies and more is something I'm going to talk about. But the more bit is largely talking about the non-profit world of art. It's a sector that I largely engaged with. It is also where the lacunae in foundational art infrastructure lies. The for-profit or market side of the art world is doing fine, and as we all know, more than fine. It is relatively easier to start a greenfield project or take an idea to fruition in the for-profit space, as there are more donors or investors, and there is usually a product or experience to sell. In the non-profit space, there is often no product, fewer donors, and often no previous model to hold up to convince a donor. Yet often, it is the non-profit space that produces the expertise that props up the market. And therein lies the skewed system we have today, the funding that goes largely for the shiny, low-hanging fruit, as I call it, the one-off festivals, events, exhibitions, book launches, conferences, truncated workshops, while the expertise and the infrastructure needed to produce these events lays seriously underfunded and underdeveloped. This insidiously leads to greater costs for each iteration of an event. As for each new project, one starts from ground zero. Methodologies and processes that could have expedited future projects are undocumented, and there is a lack of ability to absorb young professionals in a more thorough manner that allows for careers in the arts to be built. The ephemeral event, not linked to a back process in growing the sector, has unfortunately taken over most of the funding. This kind of ephemeral infrastructure works for weddings and political rallies and the large gatherings for religious festivals. But for the arts, it is detrimental. More than 75 years on from independence, the serious lack of institutions and platforms for the arts, and therefore larger engagement with publics, has the repercussions we are seeing in society today. That ingrained trained eye for beauty and design that we see in an India of the past is missing. Empathy is missing. A tolerance for different cultures among people in a secular nation is missing. Craft skills and folk and regional music traditions are under threat of disappearing. And the inequity in access to participation within the art world has remained. With this brief background, I will be talking about a program that the Arts and Culture portfolio at the Tata Trust designed and executed, using that as a base to explore four major points: program design, continuity, and thinking big in the non-profit sector. Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah. So the program that was the Art Conservation Initiative was a 4-year program that was spread across 5 institutions, with KCC, its non-profit wing, the Archana Kala Sangam Trust, being one of the institutions. It was also primarily the reasons I did join the trust. Just assessing proposals and giving grants wasn't really exciting to me, but asked to address conservation strategy and the strategy of the portfolio, and given the opportunity to design and execute a program, was an unusual offer and one that was appealing. The few art conservation conferences that I had attended harked upon the same grouse: the serious lack of conservators to handle the large amounts of objects in our country. While I was briefly trying to train as a conservator at the CSMVS in Mumbai, I realized the dire lack of structure in the art conservation sector as a whole. That experience informed the program we subsequently worked on and executed when I joined the Tata Trusts. To train conservators, one needed to work backwards to look at structural bases. Art conservation is often compared to medicine, the rigorous training needed that was both scientific and aesthetic, and as I would often joke, the only difference being is that one dealt with dead patients. But on looking carefully, the sector was nowhere near the systematic way we taught and produced doctors. In fact, I compared it to the mid-19th century when India, under colonial rule, started its first medical colleges here in Calcutta, Madras, and Bombay. With just one master's course at the National Museum and 2 large functioning labs in Delhi and Mumbai, and a few government courses at Lucknow and small site-specific intact labs, we were severely under-equipped as a country to cope with millennia worth of objects to be looked after. So this was the program that we started, and as I move on to program design, I will keep circling back to use this as an example of what I'm talking about. The setting up of new conservation centers was the first thing we did, because if you have to, the end goal was to train conservators. We wanted to establish something that when we exited would continue to do so. And so we worked with CSMVS in Mumbai in the West and with Jodhpur, because CSMVS had already was set up with Tata Trust grants, and so we knew the system there, and we wanted one known base to work with. Mehrangarh Museum Trust, Dr. Karni Jasol, who's no longer with us, was wonderful. He understood conservation, and he was the first who understood the program in the first meeting we had. And the thing he pointed out, he said, for years he was going out and talking to young students in Jodhpur in the schools about conservation. And very often he said kids in the 11th and 12th standard would ask him, how can we work in this field? And he said, I had nothing to offer them. And the rest of the points in the program, as we explained, allowed him a chance to do that. So Jodhpur was one, and this was the hegemony that we had in India then. Everything was concentrated in Delhi and in Bombay. And I was very clear that I did not want to just set up one more lab and one more institution. We had to spread the conversation about conservation around the country. And therefore, I started looking for an institution in the south, in the east, and in the far north. Abhishek Podar came to us at that time. He was setting up MAP, and we agreed to join in the setting up of the museum if we were allowed to set up the conservation lab with full curatorial control, to which he agreed. By then, I had engaged Anupam Shah as the academic advisor to the program, and Anupam and I were kind of working out how we do it. And Anupam had already been to meet Richa, and so we came here and had a meeting with her, and that's how we started we established Calcutta as the next base. From Calcutta, we were actually going to the Northeast. And it's interesting that we're here today to talk about the Northeast, because we went, and I won't name the university we went to in the Northeast, because that was the only university there. Somebody had come back from the Met after doing 6 months of conservation course there. But after that visit, I was very clear that I did not want it. And this is, I'll be talking later, is that how you, even after the Board of Trustees has passed a program, you have to start course correcting right from the start when you're laying something down. If we had gone there, it would have drained our resources and our time and not kept up with the other 5 universities, because they had no collections to work on or to access for training. They had only one person with a limited 6 months exposure to conservation, and it was in an out-of-play place to get to. So it would have raised our budget costs of holding all our workshops that we wanted to, and these are very practical decisions that you make right at the start so that you hone your program and cut out any of the challenges or frills that would bring down a program. What we did is we gave KCC an extra budget to have awareness workshops in conservation in those 4 years in the Northeast, so that in the next round, we could then go have a larger corpus of conservators to work with and set up something in the Northeast. And the last one was Himshako in Nainital, which is in Ranikhet, not Nainital, it's in Ranikhet. And we chose that because we couldn't find anything in the north. Ladakh was an option, but again, Ladakh, for practical reasons, it's difficult to get to. It would have been impossible to have year-round program there because the winters would have restricted our movement. But Ranikhet was at a railhead. So we could get students, faculty, and access to it very easily. And it was also set up by a group of trustees, and Anupam was the director of Himshako. Now, in choosing these institutions was also decision-making, because we went with a museum that was a public institution. We worked with a non-profit, which was part of another wing of that same group was doing a private entity. And Himshako was a society, so even if the person with passion leading it left, it is bound by law for the government to take over. So we knew that when you start a greenfield project, you're making a lot of decisions which are brand new, and there's a certain amount of risk-taking, but that risk-taking has to come with responsibility. So the setting up of the centers was the first thing, and in 2019, fortuitously for us, we ran around the country like chickens, setting up the physical aspects of the lab, the tables, buying the equipment, hiring the conservators who would work in that institutions, because then 2020 hit, and we'll come to that later. The training of conservators, which is the main goal of the program, was then the next objective, and they would be done at these centers and many more. It involved placing 3 conservators at each of these institutions. So there were 15 who were part of the program. In addition to CSMVS had far more, Jodhpur had far more, but in the 3 new centers, we started with just 3 institutional conservators. And then the next one was modules for material conservation training. Now, when the Tata Trust had given CSMVS a grant for what Anupam had designed a program called the Art Conservation Resurgence Project, it was a grant for starting to collect data on materials, because India was lagging so far behind on scientific data on conservation materials. Here we expanded that. He said, why don't we take it and expand that more and deepen it? And that was a good idea. But we had differences later on how we did that, and I'll come to that in the course correction part. So we chose 10 materials and assigned, according to the collection of each of these institutes, who was rich in what, and we assigned those materials to that institution. So for instance, the training modules for photography and for paper were at MAP. Kolkata had paper and oil conservation, because it's a city that has a lot of oils, even in private hands. Himshako had wood and stone. Jodhpur had textile and wall painting. And CSMVS had metals and natural history, because they had a gallery of natural history specimens, and no one knew how to conserve it. So these were the 10 materials that we chose, and we'll come to that later. The fourth thing was mapping of smaller corrections. Now, the mapping word is used loosely. Everyone is talking about mapping something in a program, and I had my reservations about it until we went further deeply. Each institution had to agree that the 3 conservators we placed with them, part of their training was to go out to neighboring states and map or document smaller collections. We developed that further during the program, because I wasn't happy with mere documentation, to helping them understand their collection, documenting it, teaching them preventive conservation, because we didn't have the money to do remedial, but also teaching them, to come back to your point, of how to write a proposal, so that they could access for CSR, because there is a certain methodology of how you approach which CSR or which funder, because you have to align that with it. So that was the mapping of the smaller collections, which was the fourth point in the program. And the last was the Masters in Art Conservation. And this is something I'll come to again later. It is, for me, a personal point that riles me a lot, that conservators are not looked on as highly as, say, curators, or as highly as conservation architect, whereas their skills are far, I would say, rigorous. I mean, to get that training, to achieve that skill is far more rigorous than either of them. So these were the 5 things. I'll reiterate them, because I'll be taking the slide off. 1 was setting up of the new conservation centers, the training of the conservators in various ways, the modules for material conservation training, which I forgot to say, this allowed people who didn't want to stay 4 years in an institution to come in and train, say, only in wood. So you could get a carpenter who wanted to come in and become more proficient in a conservation way, so that he could increase his income. And mapping of smaller collections, and the Masters in Art Conservation. I'm not putting up images of the program. If you want to look at what we did, we have an entire documented process, a documented Insta handle called TT_Art Conservation Initiative. That's Tata Trust, so TT_Art Conservation Initiative, where we have documented, made it like a working archive for us, which has remained, and it's really something that we did without any budget, but it's now a documentation of process. So the next slide. The next is, I'm going to talk about program design, and this is what I really want to talk about and use, and I'll keep coming back just to illustrate what I am talking about if it's not easily understood. I am obsessed with program design. In a country that has so little to spare for art funding, the little that comes our way has to be stretched the furthest and well. More often than not, for some programs, it's a one-shot. That makes it even more imperative that the program succeeds. As funding increases, as we have seen in the last decade, with more CSR money kicking in, many art organizations and individuals working in the arts have little experience in handling large budgets. Nor, as I have seen, do they have a proper strategy. I've dealt with organizations, long-standing esteemed ones, approach us with reasonable programs, and when asked why they limited themselves to designing programs that had limited impact on the sector and not asking for more funding, to expand a program that they had been doing the same way for the last decade. They were honest enough to say we are not capable of handling these large sums being offered. On the other hand, we got other bombastic proposals which asked for vast sums with such bravado, despite never having done anything that scale in the past, and to prove their competence in handling such sums, and put forward programs that reflected that. It's when I realized that looking at a proposal or a good idea was not enough. One had to look at the infrastructure in terms of capacity of the organization to handle both program and funding. And that's when I started looking at program proposals more holistically to see how intelligently they had been thought about. So what should one look at in a program? And here I have to say that I digress from some of the previous speakers in terms of the programs that they were presenting, because the trust at that we were looking at a program that was not going to set up an institution. We were looking at making change in a sector. So we weren't looking at setting up one conservation institute and one lab. We were looking, can what our program does at the end of 4 years change the art conservation sector? So what should one look at in a program? So the first thing is aligning with strategy. And at the Tata Trust, when I joined, conservation was one of the verticals that they were already working in. But beyond a previous strategy note saying they should work in conservation, there was no specific outline on how they should work. And when I joined, they had given there was one large project going on in built heritage, and one at the CSMBS grant I spoke about earlier. The built heritage one was with the Aga Khan Trust of Culture, and this was for the Quli Qutub Shah tombs, and it was about to start. So and then art conservation is the area that I had come in for. So we set up 3 verticals within conservation for built heritage, for art conservation, and I brought in film preservation because that is another art form that was not being looked at. And indeed, when I went out to find organizations to work with, there was only one in India that was then working in that field. So aligning with strategy for any organization, any donor is very important. If you have to have a strategy, and then you can build program within that. The clarity of vision in outcome. If you don't stick to that clarity of vision, that is where most of programs go awry. So you have to talk about the end goal. And when we used to sit down to design the program, I used to keep stressing to the team that we have to look at exit. What are we leaving on exit? And what do we want to leave on exit? And then that became what we had to do. And so if it's difficult to understand what your clarity of vision is, think of what you want left at the end, and then work backwards. So it's the clarity of vision on realizing right at the start that the Northeast, if we set up an institution which was so behind the others, it would drag the program down and therefore leave it out, build it up slowly, and then go back in the next round. So the end goal for our program was we had to increase the number of trained conservators. That was the end goal. And then how we did it, that you had to establish bases that became the building blocks of the program. And then layering a program. I find that a lot of programs can do a lot more if they think about layering within what you're doing to the program to address the urgency that India needs in building this infrastructure. We are decades behind. We've got to catch up, and we have to catch up sensibly. So we had 3 levels of training within the program. The masters, which we couldn't do eventually because of COVID. The institutional conservators who, without doing a master's, at the end of 4 years, having looked after a collection and been trained in all the materials, would be they would be equivalent to having had a master's. And through them, when they went out to teach the smaller collections, you could have at least people trained in preventive conservation in all of these. And we, at the end of the program, mapped 75 collections, which are sitting out there. We've got them all documented, and CSR can go in and help them out, because they're all smaller collections. They don't need that much funding. And the last one was the ones we trained through the material conservation courses. The next aspect is maintaining standards within budget constraints. Very often in India, we think jugaad is very romantic and should be done. You're never going to advance a field, especially a field like in conservation, which is scientific and aesthetic, and you have to maintain those standards to have lay anything seriously. So the training modules, it's 4 material conservation courses, which the first year, because we didn't know, we did what had always been done. They always had 10-day workshops in paper, 10-day workshops in photography. And I was, from the start, just against that. But since that had to be done, and we didn't know exactly how to do it, we said we'll run it for a year and see what response we get. And otherwise, I said, I'm going to do an audit, and if it doesn't work, we're dropping it, and we're not using that money. It's not, it's just no good putting good money after bad. At the end of the first year, I said, we're not doing it, because I audited it, and it was just not up to the mark. And COVID hit. And then when COVID hit, we got time, because everyone was at home. The labs were shut for 3 months. And so we went back to that and said, how can we do this well? And we realized that we needed at least 3 months of resident conservators in an institution to train them up to spec in one material. Of course, there were many naysayers within the conservation world and said, how can you produce that level of training in 3 months? But the only other example that we said, look at the government institute in Lucknow. They had a 6-month training course, of which 1 month was internship, and they taught all the materials. So I said, how can you teach all the materials in 5 months and say that's okay, when we are saying that we are going to write out a new curriculum for this one material, and in 3 months, with a 1-month internship, see what happens. And I have to say that KCC was the first institute that we tried out the model on. And that was the paper conservation course, and Sanjay Dhar came. And I still remember the first day, all of us in masks up in the lab, and we started. And at the end of 3 months, when I came back for the evaluation week, the first question I asked Sanjay, because I was so invested in this program, and I said, just tell me, how many would you hire? And he said, I would hire all 5. And that was what kicked off the others. And then we raced, because we had very little time till the end of the program, to finish all 10 modules, which we did. Now, how did we keep those standards? Sanjay Dhar, Deepika Kalsi, Anupam Shah, all these are very busy conservators. And this is the problem we have in India. This one master's, which was very good in the 90s, has produced the 12 or 15 senior conservators that we're still relying on. And they're running around the country, and they just don't have time. So I went to them, and I asked them, I said, are you willing to come for 1 week at the start, 1 week in the middle, and 1 week at the end? Are you willing to write the curriculum for us? And we'll have 5 resident students in our labs, staying in that city. By an open call, we selected them. And to their credit, they all believed in the program and said yes. And I'm eternally grateful to them because they didn't only do it, they got invested so much in the program. I remember Deepika's training program was absolutely exemplary. I mean, she went beyond the 1 week. She stayed on 10 days. She said, I just love it. And she stayed on 15 days the second time at her own cost. And we finished all, and every one of those who came out of that program was employable. So the Stone program, CSMVS hired 3 of them within the week of them finishing it. The only one that, okay, there's 10 minutes left, so I'm going to race through. The only one that we didn't, this thing was the wallpaper one that we couldn't, we didn't certify them because there was a lot. So this maintaining of standards with budget constraints, if you think imaginatively, appeal to people, it is possible. And ensuring non-dependence on exit. And this meant that we were very clear, we're not thinking of a round 2 for these institutions. And how to do, it's not just monetarily that you can build this non-dependence, it's competence in the people who are running it. If you train them well enough, they will be able to run it, and they will attract other projects that come into it, as we have proven at CSMVS. So when CSM was set up at first, CSMVS now gets projects in Oman to do. And that's the kind of thing that we want all the institutes to be able to take on private work, build their income, run these training modules now by charging students and become an income generating. And course correction, I suggested during COVID what we did. And COVID also was the online classes, and this is where inclusion comes in. Because everyone was sitting at home, the 15 conservators at these institutes, we got them online twice a week. One, they had to talk about an object that they had been working on, and the second one was we gave them reading material, and then they had to talk about that. And I realized about 6 or 7 of them were not talking, and there was no structure. And I remember closing a meeting down. I just quietly came on the Zoom call, and I said, Anupam, can we just convene, and just, I need to talk, and can we? And I came back, and I said, there's no structure to it. Put a structure, keep it 1 hour, and I want an institute to present. I don't want an individual to present. I want the 3 together to present. And we told them, present in any language you want. And we realized that Hindi was keeping them, some of them from speaking out. So that happened, and we put structure. They had to know the art history of the object, the condition report, the deterioration in the objects, how they were going to treat. And it became so structured that when the labs opened and they went back to the lab, they said, can we keep these online classes on? And meet as 15. And that was what I wanted, that conversation to happen around the country, to be connected, to understand objects in other museums. And it went on for the 3 years of the program after that. The next one is continuity as sustainability. Now, I don't understand what sustainability is if a program, when you start something, and if after a few years of doing it well or initial seed funding runs out, it fails to stay in the game effectively. A lot of ambitious projects get scuttled as people leave, world events force a slowdown or shut down, and funding moves to the next new thing. More and more, one has to think about these at the start of a program and course correct as progress happens. Course correction is inevitable, and this is where good leadership comes in and the ability to take decisions fast and keep the project stable. This in an art program is doubly sensitive as you are dealing with different entities, not only a donor-grantee situation, but also within an organization, a curatorial versus finance team situation. Famously in India, the art world has not dealt with accountability of funds received. How you handle funds from individual donors or foundations or CSR varies vastly, not only in the intent or demand of the donor, but the laws that govern them. One may secure a large grant, but if you do not have the capacity of spending it in the time framework specified, it becomes redundant as new laws prevent access to unutilized funds. This is where people play a vital part. Who you hire and how you hire is vital to the continuity of a program. A sound financial and legal structure is the base. But in art organizations, a good donor should never interfere with the curatorial decisions once there has been alignment and understanding of shared strategy or values. Therefore, a curatorial lead has the freedom to lay a program, but again, this cannot be freedom without responsibility. This is one area that is seriously misunderstood in the art world. The notion of I am a creative entity, I cannot deal with the paperwork and managerial side of the job, has to change if you step into a leadership role. And the understanding that there has to be a continuous dialogue between the donor and client or your finance team on deliverables, on spending, and schedules. This dialogue is not confrontational. It should not be, but requires total honesty by both parties. Often there is a necessary overspend on a certain area of the program, or as we say, line item of the budget. Immediately, there should be questions asked and explanations given, and then followed up with how do we course correct and look at the options. Will the donor increase the budget? Often not possible. Can we raise more money? And if not possible, how do we pair the program to stay within the budget? And one has to pair and stay within the budget to keep the goodwill for future funding. In the non-profit world, this is largely development money and should be treated as such. Building leadership is not ideally done by rising through the ranks or going for an art manager's course. Leadership is best built by immersion, over iterations and through experience in a program. The need to then be aware to build it into a program. So the same training modules where we got the experts like Deepika and the 5 who were living at the institution, we didn't leave those 5 floundering when they weren't around. We hired a mid-level conservator who was also resident. He was the bridge between the experts and the conservators. So, and we realized only at the end that putting him in that position, he was soon, towards the end, taking all the decisions. He understood the curriculum. He knew when to call in the 3-day technical experts for an equipment. We were building a leader in him. If hiring is vital, then understanding the work each person plays is vital. This drawing up of work plans is imperative from the donor's viewpoint. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Yeah. From the donors, as installment releases only happen when funds released for a period of work against it is achieved. This may sound industrial, it is not. It is just consistency in work and hard work and staying the course. It is actually helpful to execute a program well and on time. It means being present on the ground and available. That course correction often is a daily exercise. If a job description and work plan is detailed, it makes continuity for an organization easier, even if people change, even as a new curatorial vision is given full freedom. Now, this one is the slide of the police archives, and I think Deepti was also part of that. It was in Bombay. It was a sensitive archive. It had records of Gandhi being arrested and, on the mill strikes and everything. So they wouldn't allow their papers to go outside for digitization or conservation. So since it would have taken years to finish the conservation work, and they didn't have the budget, and we weren't willing to give that much, we trained police officers to become conservators. We set up a small lab within that space, and these police officers then became conservators, and even after 1 year of setting them up, after we withdrew, it continued. And it was a finite archive, so they could finish it. So that is a continuity in process, and the other one is KMB, and I'll come to that a bit later. Documentation of process is very important. While curatorial visions change, the mundane in bringing an event to fruition does not. Having a proven, corrected over time methodology in place allows for a better program. Building a corpus is so necessary. It's tough, but a lot of institutions during COVID went under just because they didn't have enough corpus to just pay salaries and pay rent. And this is something that is difficult in these days because a lot of donors aren't giving corpus grants. But I think building it slowly over time is just necessary. You need legal and financial support. Laws keep changing, and your own finance team has to keep you on budget. And then there's profit and non-profit. I think a lot of museums and other non-profit organizations need to, can I have 5 minutes more since she finished early? So, museum shops and catering and things like that. Mehrangarh Museum Trust was fantastic at that. Karni, when I asked Karni, where do you get your money for your exhibitions? He said, we never asked for donors because he built he got all that funding through the shops and the catering facilities he set up within the fort. And that The recent switch in the West is hiring out their curatorial services. Then conservation centers taking outside work and training modules. Why is this building of profit within non-profit important by an institution? It's because you are not at a donor's mercy. You are not at a donor saying you can hire this curator and that. This is your money to hire whoever you want, do whatever exhibition you want. And it is just unfettered money. And the last slide that I want to talk, and I'll end in 5 minutes, is that Marty Supreme is a new movie that's coming out with Timothée Chalamet, who's a fantastic actor. And as he's been promoting, is Think Big. The nonprofit world has for long been diffident about thinking big. But in the last few years, we have seen museums and art centers come up, driven by individuals like the Museum of Art and Photography, or right here by Richa Agarwal, or by government like the Bihar Museum. That slide is the film preservation workshops. Shivendra Singh Dungarpur and Tisha Cherian of Film Heritage Foundation always thought big, 70 big. When I was looking to add film preservation as part of strategy, I was looking for an organization working in film preservation, and they were the only ones in the country in the field, and were just starting out too. Film preservation was in such a nascent state that even though they had a clear big picture of what their eventual goal was, they knew they had to start with small steps. Starting with support for workshops around the country to build awareness and training, we subsequently worked with them on the next stage of institution building, a permanent film preservation lab that is due to open this year. They have a bigger picture as end goal, a film archive, a museum, and a lab, and they're in talks with the government of Maharashtra to get that land. But this takes time, and the second stage of growth will only prepare them for that. It took 2 artists to start the Kochi Biennale, something, if one consulted management experts or gallerists or government then, was an untouchable event. It has now become a much-loved event locally in Kochi and around India and regionally. And though there have been many hiccups and in recent times more sad news, it is inconceivable that it is not here to stay. Additionally to starting a behemoth like KMB, they also started a Students' Biennale, engaging with over 50 art colleges around the country and bringing those students' works to Kochi. It is simply mind-boggling, and we partnered with them and supported them from the 2016 Students' Biennale, and I think right after the present one. And yet it was brought to fruition, a young artist platform alongside the main Biennale that has become a must-see for every Biennale goer and a fertile ground for curators, gallerists, and collectors to spot the next new stars of the art world. The risks that the artists' minds brought, that freedom of expression that flowed in the spectacular spaces the Biennale tapped into, no finance person or CEO could have imagined or done. I, for one, am grateful for the start of a Biennale I love, that was molded purely on allowing art from around the world to mingle unfettered. But having applauded all of this, I would like to come back to program design to highlight all the tensions that built up with each successive Biennale. While there was clarity of vision, it was not followed up by putting systems in place, working within budgets, building a corpus, a good finance management system. It just didn't keep up with the quick growth that happened. Artists don't make for good managers often, and with the Biennale becoming larger with each edition, it was bound to run into trouble as Jugaad finally follows, or gives. And the middle slide is a picture of Kanchenjunga, and this is Sikkim. I would like to end with this aspect of how we got to Sikkim. So in the last year of the program, I suddenly remembered we had parked this awareness money, and because of COVID, we hadn't gone there. And so KCC put out a call. We said, by then trying to put these modules and finish them, we asked them to put out a call for fellowships for people from anyone from any of the 7 states to come apply, and we would send them to one of the 5 institutions around the country to get a 4-month kind of internship. I remember I was in London when I got the results of them, and I was really disappointed because none of them seemed appropriate, and I thought, okay, we're not going to do this, and we'll just return the money to the trust. We had dinner that night in London, and I was walking back, and it suddenly struck me that we had trained a girl, Alenla, at Himshako through 2 of the training modules, so for 8 months. And so when I messaged my colleague and I said, who sent her to us? And she said the State Archives of Sikkim. So I said, what is she going back to? So she said, I don't know. So we came back, and within 2 weeks, my colleague and I were in Sikkim, and we went to the State Archives, and it was fortuitous because they were putting up Sikkim's first state museum, and right next to the archives. And we went there, and they had marked 2 doors with little labels saying conservation. So I got very excited, and I said, can I meet the culture secretary? Can we do this program? And that's the nice thing about the smaller states. We got an appointment immediately, a very nice, intelligent IAS officer, and he understood the program, and he said, please come. So we were back there 2 months later, but when we came back to Bombay, I told Anupam, we are not doing a normal workshop. Sikkim is peculiar because all their objects are in monasteries, or the majority of them. So we knew that we trained the police, we had to train the monks, because those objects weren't going to come out. And so, and it was a state that was just putting up this museum. So for 2 days, we had a workshop for only the admin peoples and made them draw out a 10-year vision, a program of how to take conservation, because they had by then seen KCC Lab pictures and CSM Vyas, and they were excited, and they thought that that was how it was going to start. And I said, no, it starts with a table. So we gave them that vision, and then for me to I was leaving, but we put in place 2 grants for these 4-month modules, which KCC did one and Himshako did one, pertaining to the materials those objects were largely in. And it was so, this at the start of my program would not have been possible. But by the end, we had the curricula in place, we had the faculty in place, we had the methodology in place, and we just said, KCC go, and KCC went for 4 months. After that, Himshako went for 4 months. In between, we asked them to tap the Ministry of Culture for the special Northeast Conservation Grant, which they got, and set up the lab. And in a year, it was a fully functioning lab. And that is what I mean by documentation of methodology and process. It expedites the next iteration of laying something and addresses the urgency that we need in addressing the lacuna in not only conservation, but many other fields. So lastly, I would like to end with the ACI. 3 of us ran this program. Me as lead, Anupam Shah as academic advisor, and Paroma Sadhana as program officer. There were tempers and laughs, but we all knew that what each one had to do, and left each other to carry out our job descriptions that kept expanding. The program design took this limitation of just 3 of us into account. So we designed it to spread out the workload through all the institutions, the experts, and the faculty who plugged in and out as needed. And to all of them, I'm very grateful for assisting us in showing what program design can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepika. I know that we already have a question from Ushmita. Go ahead, Ushmita.
Thank you so much, Deepika, for that presentation. And for the audience, what I'm about to say is not really a question, but an observation, because she was talking a lot about setting up the conservation lab in KCC. So those who are not aware, we do have a art conservation and restoration lab. Some of the members were the ones that Tata Trust had trained. So from what Deepti said in the earlier session, which was about the archives and having worked with the Imami Foundation and Imami group of companies and making up an archive, and then Deepika just spoke about the conservation. So there are ways in which KCC has been involved in certain of the projects that are being spoken of. But Deepika, I just had a quick observation from what you said, which was, you were talking about, sometimes where the carpenters come and learn conservation so that they can bring it to the community, or they become part of the conservation process. And you also spoke about different projects that we can learn from. I think the lab has also, I've seen the lab also grow and learn from bringing these indigenous knowledge systems into the lab and giving us information on materials and practices that have been observed, in a lineal condition, which sometimes the earlier prevalent conservation methods, which were more from a Western, or from an outside India perspective, I think those were edited, like course-corrected, even while the process. I think my lab members are here, and they can reiterate that there was a great session with the the Patachitra painters and also the Tanjavur painters. So they did understand what the traditional methods were. So I think for all the young people who are here, what Deepika was speaking about is very important, that to learn from the communities as well. So as I said, it was a wrong learning observation rather than a question.
Thank you, Ushmita. It'd be lovely to hear from the conservators. If you'd like to say something in response.
Yeah, so
please introduce yourself as well.
Hi, this is Shreyan. I'm from KCC Conservation Lab, and I was one of the, members. I have been associated with the initiative since right from the beginning. So as Deepika ji mentioned, I am one of the 15 conservators. And yes, as Ushmita mentioned, we also collaborated with Bengal Patachitra artisans and Tanjavur artisans, because we keep getting traditional art, art objects. And sometimes, often we see that, conservators, they use material. Suppose we have to give a lining, strengthening of a paper object, which is a traditional art. And people use some material which are commonly used in, suppose, West, like in Victoria and Albert or British Museum. And the adhesives are, fine for the climate there. But we didn't check that how if we use it in, Indian climate. And even if when we go to the field visits and talk with the artisans, so it's also not a good idea to just suggest that these would be the proper material to strengthen your objects with. So we found we listen from them, what they use. Sometimes whatever they use, scientifically, logically, these are completely correct. But they don't have that explanation, because they have been using trade conventionally, because they have seen their forefathers, they have also used that. So we also, under the Tata Trust program, used to go to the field surveys as well. So we also did some survey in the tribal communities near Shantiniketan. We did one survey in Museum of Santhal Culture. So we interacted with the Santhal community. So when it is not their hunting season, so they keep their metal items in their household, and they use some sort of coating with wax and all, or sometimes oils. So they don't know why, but they just do it. But what is the purpose and that explanation? So we have interacted with them, and they have also expressed that maybe they can, provide us with the information, and we can simultaneously, give our input, that explanation, and maybe a good research book or documentation. So this kind of, experience just I wanted to share.
Thank you.
Just to take on that, it's what he's describing of was very important. Why we wanted to lay these labs around the country, because say he's talked about Patachitra and the Santal objects. So in the south you have Thayam masks. In the north you have Tankas, and so this local knowledge to come in. There was a hegemony of even what objects was being conserved, because it was only Delhi and Mumbai. And that is why it was important to spread it. And we managed to do that in a 4-year program and allow for all this knowledge to come in, which, as he says, it's knowledge, but it's just, they don't know it's knowledge. It's just, Bijoy would have been very happy with you. It's just come down. So.
Thank you. Yes, Srila.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Deepika, very much. Enjoyed hearing about your project, which I remember talking to Anupam about at the very beginning. So my name's Srila, and I'm from the Charles Wallace India Trust, which some of you may have heard of, and delighted to meet Deepti for the first time, who is part of our alumni, and Paula Sengupta is also here. So we've been funding individuals from India to come to the UK to study in various ways for 45 years plus now. And one of the major impacts that the Trust has had is on conservation, because the early people who studied building conservation went to the UK, largely to the University of York and also to the University of Edinburgh. And so, for example, in the south, we have Benny Kuriakose. In the west, we have Vikas Tilauri, Abhala Narain Lamba, and of course, Ratish Nanda in the north. Anupam himself is also part of the Quit family. So in these decolonial times, it's possibly that Charles Wallace India Trust is becoming something of an anomaly, because why should you have to go abroad at all to study any of these things? And the project that Deepika outlined, which is strategic in its nature, which was so well thought through, etc., means that you do not have to go to the UK anymore. We still continue to get applications from students of postgraduate plus study. And it's very interesting that the person who's gone to the UK to do conservation this year is not looking at materials. They're actually doing digital heritage at the University of York. So in a way that Deepti kind of talked about it, things evolve and the sort of field of study grows and so forth. But anyway, if you want to talk to me about what the Charles Wallace India Trust does, I'm around tomorrow as well, so you can. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's all we have time for. I'd like to thank you, Deepika, for a really enlightening session, and also on behalf of KCC for all your support for the Conservation Lab and all the rest of the work you did when you were at Tata Trust, and we look forward to your next act.
It's
to be announced soon.
No, it's reading books and consuming films. Marty Supreme next.
Thank you.